Hey guys, Brennan here. In this video, I'm going to discuss the mandatory digital ID that was issued in the UK and what it means for the world, and why we all need to refuse it at all costs. Now, the UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has now announced that digital ID will be made mandatory for every citizen in the UK. Unless they use digital ID to verify themselves, they won't be able to look for employment. This is being proposed as a measure to help combat illegal migration and prevent the hidden black economy from growing larger than it already is. However, all you need to do is a little bit of research to understand this has been in the works for a long time and is misinformation directly being told by the UK government. Digital ID is starting to gain traction in many other developed nations, marking the beginning of a global push to make digital ID mandatory. China serves as a blueprint for what can go wrong. Make no mistake, this is about controlling the human race, and let me explain why. Now, Keir Starmer has been grilled on the effectiveness and necessity of a digital ID.
Needs to be done, including introducing, as I announced this week, digital ID, so that we are clear in the principle that you cannot work in the United Kingdom if you do not have ID. Because too many people are able to get into the black economy and work illegally in this country, and we need to deal with that and deal with that effectively.
One of our viewers got in touch and wanted us to ask this question. Russ Brown wanted us to ask you if you really believe that those profiting from human trafficking will think, oh dear, I have to check your digital ID now. I can't carry on paying you £1.50 an hour to work in my sweatshop.
I'm absolutely convinced that amongst the reasons that people travel through France, which is a safe country, to come to the United Kingdom, amongst the reasons is because it's easier to work in our illegal economy than it is in other countries. And we have to deal with that.
Bosses who are prepared to hire people illegally are not asking them for their national insurance card. So what's the evidence? What makes you think they're suddenly going to ask them for a digital ID?
We need to be really clear. You must have ID, mandatory digital ID, in order to work, because we have to stop illegal working.
The UK already has measures in place to document legal work, like the national insurance number. What this is really about is the transition into a new kind of world order, and one dictated by surveillance and control through the use of digital IDs and central bank digital currencies. The world runs on fiat currencies, where currency is created from nothing by financial institutions and entities, and we hope that in the future that currency turns into productivity and lowers prices of the things we need and want on a daily basis. A common misconception is that savings or taxes are what fuel growth in our economies. But if that were true, we would not be as technologically advanced as we are now. The technologies we take for granted every day were made possible by increasing the production and improving manufacturing methods, which help bring down the costs of goods and services we have access to today. We could not have arrived at this point so quickly without the creation of credit and debt. The monetary system we have today broke down in 2007-2008, and it has been on life support since then. That's why central banks use tools like quantitative easing to keep it from falling apart. The housing market was overrun by speculation and subprime lending.
The financial crisis started because people like Darnell Horton, who bought a home near Atlanta, Georgia, could no longer afford to make payments on their subprime mortgage loans. Subprime is a term that refers to risky loans that initially had low interest rates, but after a few years, the interest rates jumped. These loans required less verification, like whether borrowers had jobs. As long as home prices were rising, borrowers who had difficulty repaying loans could sell their houses at a profit and pay off the loan.
Financial instruments such as collateralized debt obligations and mortgage-backed securities began to falter. Another theory as to why the system broke is that it coincided with the time when baby boomers, the largest generation in U.S. history, began to retire. And you can't have continued gains in the housing market if your pool of new buyers continues to shrink. Housing is the most significant driver of what's referred to as the wealth effect. And the wealth effect contributes heavily to capital flows in the economy. If your asset prices go up, specifically the value of your house, you're more willing to spend into the economy if your asset value goes up instead of down. However, by doing so, it prevents the formation of households as the cost of living is unmanageable for many, on top of the cost of purchasing a home. The financial system is the world's best kept Ponzi scheme, and you can't continue a Ponzi scheme without ever increasing participants. And that's just not happening as birth rates are falling in most parts of the globe. Trust was lost during the Great Financial Crisis, and it will never return as nothing was fixed. Problems were papered over, with currency to prevent things from crashing down. Now, central governments and central banks are attempting to transition us into a new monetary system, Central Bank Digital Currencies, where inflation and deflation are more easily controlled, but at the cost of your privacy and your autonomy. Now, going back to Keir Starmer, in the UK, his defense that illegal workers having a digital ID will prevent them from working there could be correct if a central bank digital currency was the only currency available. If cash were made to be obsolete and not legal tender anymore, then it would make sense how they would be able to stop illegal work, which is definitely a future we are rapidly heading towards. Bank branch closures are occurring on a larger scale and at a faster pace than ever before. If bank branches become harder to access, so does physical cash. Bank bail-ins have been introduced as a new tool to recapitalize banks in the event of a liquidity crisis or crunch. And it was introduced by the IMF and have been implemented as law in most countries, where creditors and shareholders will bear the losses of a failed financial institution. It's also my understanding that in most parts of the world, a creditor can be classified as a depositor of the bank.
It's really important. I mean, it's a little bit conflicted, right? I mean, it's important that people understand they can be bailed in, but you don't want a huge run on the institution, but they're going to be.
People need to know, but I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
I completely agree with that. I almost think you'd scare the public if you put this out. Like, why are they telling me this? Should I be concerned about my bank? Like, my insurance company doesn't tell me what they're doing with my assets. If they just assume they're going to pay my claim, right? I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than maybe people in this room do. So there's a select crowd of people that are in the institutional side. And if they want to understand this, they're going to find a way to understand this. There's a bunch of law firms represented in this room. There's a bunch of people that charge them by the hour a lot of money to explain this all to them. And it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And they all have huge staffs. But I would be careful about the unintended consequences of starting to blast too much of this out in the general.
Bank runs would collapse many banks if they all didn't shut down simultaneously on the same day as a liquidity event, assuming the general public understood what a bail-in was. It would also lead to more shotgun mergers, similar to what we saw with the bank collapses in 2023, further consolidating the banking sector and likely leaving large banks behind. It appears that a significant portion of the world's investments and capital flows have been directed towards fueling speculative assets rather than productive ones in recent years. Like, for example, large asset bubbles we're creating in stock markets or housing markets where they don't actually produce anything of value, just higher prices. The world probably wouldn't be in this position if we only created more and consumed less. Many of the signs we see today are eerily similar to those in Japan in the late 80s and early 90s, where the nation's luxuries and high asset values led to the long-term collapse of its economy, financial system, and contributed to its falling birth rates. They essentially were the test case for where most of the modern world is now. Now, I understand the case for the necessity of digital IDs and CBDCs. They could be used in tandem as a way to control currency supplies, leading to an overall slowing of and then eventual global population decline. Higher prices wouldn't run away like they would with a fiat currency system that we have now. Taxes and bond buying would be effective measures to remove adequate currency from the system and tame inflation, given that everything is digital and recordable. A general theory out there suggests that neither taxes nor bonds determine government spending, and that governments can create their own funds from nothing as long as those funds are denominated in their own currency. We already have bank digital currency. Electronic transactions account for the majority of transactions in the economy. The primary difference between bank digital currency and central bank digital currency lies in the ability to program the currency to a high degree due to its complexity and advancement in payment technology. If paired with your digital ID, it can eventually reach the point of controlling your transactions.
We're developing, through technology, an ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean? That's where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
As a digital ID is likely to monitor your every movement, purchase, social media presence, location, and personal history.
Now, in all our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash. And there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
The IDs we have now can already do that to a certain extent, but often you can flash your ID in a location and the encounter is never recorded. This could reach the point where everything you do is recorded. If a central authority doesn't like what you do or are doing, it could come to the point where your account, your currency, your livelihood, and your ability to live will be compromised. I understand the arguments for a digital ID and its potential to control the population as a means to combat the slow destruction of our society and our world. I believe climate change has become this umbrella term for a multitude of problems facing humanity today. I'm not denying that it isn't a real problem. I just know of quite a few more issues that are equally destructive to our way of living, which I barely hear anybody talking about. It's like in the past 100 years, we treated the earth like one long continuous party, and we're just now starting to collect the tab. I would rather return to a gold standard or a gold-backed currency where our currency has value again. It could help alleviate many of the world's problems, including resource depletion, pollution, and social issues, but it would come at a great cost. Shifting back to a currency like that would send the world immediately into a deep recession, if not a depression, as gold, as much as I love it, makes for a terrible medium of exchange for the human race. It's not as liquid as cash or currency, it's not very portable due to its weight, and it's inconvenient to process payments in the modern economy we live in today. It's too perfect a money for an imperfect race. We screw up all the time, and the human race needs liquidity and a currency system to match how much it screws up. However, central banking is not the greatest solution either, because what it's done for us in the past 100 years since it's been around is that we've never corrected things in the economy, and we have so much surplus and waste that we see nowadays. And if we were to let banks and institutions correct naturally, we wouldn't have all these issues today. A lot of the issues we have today stems back to central banking. I would rather central governments and central banks announce a commodity or gold standard than have a system that tracks and judges my every movement before I can make it. Because if your currency can be programmed against your desires, and currency is a representation of your labor, do you even own your own labor? Then ask yourself, what do you own if you don't own the right to your labor? If you fight for anything in your life, fight this. Fight for your autonomy. Fight to unshackle yourself and your loved ones from this tyrannical system that will eventually be introduced. Those that are familiar with CBDCs and digital IDs are typically opposed to them. However, they'll continue to be pushed, often during times of crisis. Like, let's say there's another pandemic. They'll never let a good crisis go to waste. Thank you for watching to the end. If you like this video, please leave a comment letting me know what you think down in the comments of this video, and share it with anyone and everyone you know. Take care.